we are for another, rather astonishingly, in person, where Alastair gets to grimace at me across the table. Question
Get to
time,
the point!
Question time version of The Rest Is Politics.
It's called The Rest Is Politics Question Time.
With me, Rory Stewart.
And me, Alastair Campbell.
And unfortunately, both of us in the room, which I always find a bit intimidating. Okay, come on, now I'm going to start with this. Lewis Abbott, How to Suggest Policy. When a normal person in the street, such as myself, thinks of what they deem a good policy idea, what do they do with it? Who do I contact? I've emailed Keir Starmer via multiple channels and have not heard back. Any advice on this? Oh, I tell you, it's pretty shocking, actually.
Well, listen, do you know what? I get this a lot from people. I think politics is uniquely bad at absorbing potentially good ideas from other people. Now, maybe his idea is terrible, and lots of people have really bad ideas which they think are brilliant. But I'm quite well connected in the Labour Party. I still know an awful lot of people. I've had quite recently been trying to get somebody who I think would be an amazing asset to the Labour Party in to see people at the top to see how they can be used. And he's getting quite close to giving up.
It's a bandwidth problem, isn't it? The politicians end up not having any time to think. I remember Mitt Romney saying to me when I started as a politician, he said to me, you've got to do all your thinking now because you're not going to have any time to think when you're a politician. And one of the reasons they don't take on good people and good ideas is they're so stressed and overworked. Their brains are basically shut down.
But that's why you have to have people around you that you can do that. And I'll tell you one thing, as you know, and I don't know if you saw the interview in the Times Magazine where Saeed Awarsi...
No, you haven't told us about this. Are you doing a show?
I'm doing a TV show called Make Me Prime Minister.
Make Me Prime Minister. Well, yeah, really, you and Saeed Awarsi.
It was on Tuesday and it's going for 6 weeks. Anyway, Rory, we did an interview together with the Times Magazine and Saeed said that I was in love with Tony Blair, which, may I say, I am not. But I have enormous respect for Tony Blair. And one of the things I respect about him is that he did make time to think. And he did a lot of it on planes. And he would literally turn the phones off, like for a few hours, and he would think. And then he would write, and then he would send out notes. But my point is, other people are every bit as good. People who are outside politics have ideas. How do you get them fed into the system?
Well, one of the things I believe in really deeply, and I'm always getting in trouble for, is I'm a real believer in these things called citizens' assemblies, which are these juries where you randomly select 300 people from the country, a bit like a massive jury, and you let them get into stuff over 6-7 days with a panel of experts, and the ideas that come out of those are extraordinary. It resolved the abortion debate in Ireland. I think it could have come up with a moderate Brexit if we'd given that kind of mechanism of proper hope.
Well, I'm hoping that Gordon Brown's late review for Labour of constitutional and democratic questions might do things like that. And I also see that if the reports are accurate, that he's thinking of getting rid of the House of Lords.
Before I get into the House of Lords,
are you going to go?
Kind of slightly worrying.
Are you going to go?
Well, I mean, nobody's offered.
Would you go?
Nobody's offered.
Would you
me
go
yet.
into the House of Lords?
Have you got a route in? Do I get to be called Lordy Dordy? He likes to party. I've always wanted that title.
Would you go into the House of Lords, Rory? Come on, just spit it out.
Yeah, definitely. Would you? Are you offering? Really?
I've been offered and I've said no several times.
Oh, that's the story. That's the story. You see, but that brings me to another thing that you've been offered, I believe, before, which is Strictly Come Dancing. Maria F., a non-politics one, brackets, sorry. Have either of you been asked to do Strictly, and would you ever consider it? For those of you listening in Albania, this is Strictly Come Dancing. Did wonder for Ed Balls. Bet you both have a few moves up your sleeves.
I've been asked many times. I've been offered a lot of money.
How much do they pay?
The biggest one ever I got offered was not far off 7 figures for one of the jungle ones.
You would have made nearly £1 million for going to the jungle.
It was a lot of money, but I think they were just testing whether I actually ever would say yes. And I said to them, I will never, ever say yes.
That's like Celebrity Jungle.
Would you do it?
Celebrity Jungle, no. No, I wouldn't at all.
That was a very, very light no.
No, that's a strong no.
Would you do Strictly? Never.
No, it's a strong no on all that
You've got
stuff.
bad knees anyway.
Strong no on all that stuff. I actually was asked in 2008, a production company got in touch with me and they said, we hear you're a bit of an expert on, Indonesia and you speak Indonesian and, you've done travel books and stuff. And I thought, this sounds like a very classy offer. Then they said, well, so we've got this idea. What we're going to do is we're going to drop you and 5 members of the British public into the middle of the Borneo jungle. And then we're going to give you a chance to navigate them out over 45 days to the coast. and it's you or Bear Grylls, they said, right? And I suddenly could see a sort of vision of this show where every single day it was going to be Rory as the kind of floppy-haired incompetent trying to... Oh, no, sorry, I've missed the point. They were 5 convicts, that's right.
Even better. Well, you believe in prison reform.
I was going to be in the jungle with 5 convicts, and every day they were going to be like, this fucking guy's got lost again. And I'd be like, now, come on, chaps. I think we just got to go north here. So I haven't done this stuff because I always thought that old Gorbachev looked a bit rubbish doing that pizza ad.
I've got a file at home that is ridiculously thick and might one day make a book.
Well, wait a second.
Which is TV projects I've said no to.
Why did you not take £1 million for going to the jungle? What went wrong there?
No way.
Why not?
I think once you've done that, you've moved over to a very dark side.
Okay, now I know you had a question for me, but because you struggled to find questions for me, I'm going to ask you a question from Cam Singh, which really interests me. Mm-hmm. Okay. Started listening to the podcast late spring, which happened to coincide with me starting to read the Wolf Hall trilogy. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason we're talking about Wolf Hall, of course, is the amazing Hilary Mantel has just died. My brain has subconsciously somehow managed to assimilate the voice of Alastair with Thomas Cromwell. And I read the whole thing as if Alastair was playing Thomas Cromwell. Could Alastair have been Henry's fixer? No offence intended.
Hilary Mantel once did an interview or talked at a festival where she said that when you're reading the book, if you're a modern-day reader, imagine Alastair Campbell with an axe. That's what she said. Now, Rory, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Ellie Thompson, we've got some really eagle ears listening to this podcast. Does Rory realise that he used the term we in last week's Question Time podcast when referring to what we need in the Labour Party? Is there an imminent announcement we should know about? Smiley face.
Well, there definitely was until famously they announced they were abolishing the House of Lords, thus removing my big incentive.
No, they haven't announced it yet. So what, you would take a position in a Labour government if they bugged your peerage? I think you'll find that the police could get involved in that one, Rory. Here's another one for you. Sophie Davis, following the catastrophic mini-budget, Kami Kwasi Kwarteng, would Rory extend Give Directly to the poorest in the UK?
So, Alastair, thank you for that question. And just to remind people who've not been listening to every episode, Give Directly is a charity that I am the president of, and we work largely on extreme poverty, and we do it through believing very, very strongly that the most useful, efficient way of helping people in extreme poverty is not to try to guess what they want by giving them a bicycle or setting up a program for them, but by giving people cash so that they can actually choose to fulfill their needs. And it's miraculous.
Right. So UK?
Whether you're poor in the United States or you're poor in the United Kingdom, the most useful thing that you can have is cash, because that allows you to decide what your priorities are. Mm. More than just being a question of you choosing what's useful for you, it gives dignity to you. It gives freedom to you. There is a difference, though, which is that the people that we're working with in Africa are living often on $3 or $4 a month. So the amount of money that you have to give in Britain or the United States to genuinely transform someone's life will be greater. But it's still true that actually somewhere at the very foundation of the welfare state, and I hope at the foundation of the welfare states that come to be built in the poorest countries of the world, is the idea that you give dignity to someone by giving them the freedom of resources.
Okay, talking money, Siobhan, who calls herself the Princess of Yorkshire, is the government a criminal cabal? Do you not think there should be a royal commission on corruption, on the looting that appears to be going on of the public purse, and on the insider trading? What do you think of that, Rory? Well, I do think we have a corrupt government.
I definitely think we have a corruption problem in Britain, and I think that we need to set up proper institutions, and part of that was exposed by the horror around the ministerial code, the fact that Boris Johnson clearly broke the ministerial code and it seemed to be difficult to do anything about it. So Parliament, the idea of Parliament's sovereign, do whatever it wants. And there's this famous 18th century quote by somebody looking at Parliament. He says, Parliament, the English Constitution, Parliament can do everything but make a woman a man and a man a woman. This is a great comment, right?
Which now it can.
Which now it probably can, yeah, probably can. World's moved on a bit since the 18th century. But that only really works when Parliament has a sense of its own restraint and balance. So the truth in the 18th century was actually the Parliament, House of Commons was balanced against the House of Lords, it was balanced against the monarchy, it was in effect balanced against the Church of England. And if Parliament has lost a sense of self-restraint, then we definitely need commissions, structures, rules, regulations, laws.
Liz Truss that says she won't have an ethics advisor. Even Johnson had one of those, even because she says she knows the difference between right or wrong. And there's a situation, there's quite a few questions about this. Alex P., I'd be interested in your thoughts on Mark Fulbrook, Truss's chief of staff, who's been interviewed by the FBI recently about another scandal, having his salary paid by his own lobbying firm. Now, the papers that reported this story, and by the way, if that had been me or Jonathan Powell or anybody in Tony Blair's team, that would have led the news. Okay, it's barely registered.
And my fear, because I know you often say this, my fear is that it's even worse than you think. You think it's that they're getting away with it because they're a right-wing government. I think it's even more awful for us, which is that actually standards in public life have dropped so much that things which would have seemed very, very shocking in the late 90s.
But I think the public will be shocked by that. If they knew about it.
I deeply hope the public are shocked by it.
If they knew, but they don't know.
But I think that you were held to higher standards, not just because you were a Labour government, but because generally we expected more of our governments.
So that one, for example, the papers that did write about it basically said that they thought this was a scandal because he was doing it so as to avoid paying tax. The point is, it's a total, massive conflict of interest.
It's also totally humiliating for the British government. So to be Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister should be the greatest job almost that anybody could imagine. A chance to serve your country, to have the most immense power, budget of nearly £1 trillion a year at the rate they're spending at the moment, and a chance to really make a difference. And for somebody like Mark Fulbrook, this is the moment to step aside and serve your country. Instead of which, I guess what's happening, even if he's not avoiding tax, I think probably more likely what's happening is he's probably paid a fortune. So what he's probably said is, right, I'll let my company keep paying me and I'll work for you for free. I'll be seconded across so I don't have to take a pay cut. But it's so sort of budget and humiliating and awful for a country to be in that situation.
Well, listen, here's another one, double standards. Tom Langridge, you talked last week about Michael Foot and the donkey jacket and Jeremy Corbyn not singing the national anthem. Why has there been next to no coverage of Kwasi Kwarteng laughing in church at the Queen's funeral?
Let me try to defend him on that. I know I've become the professional Kwasi Kwarteng defender. I saw that and I recognised the 13-year-old boy that I knew years ago. I think it's a weird, slightly geeky facial tic thing he does. He does it a lot. If you watch him carefully, you'll see him walking down in the House of Commons suddenly chortling about absolutely nothing.
Sorry, Rory, he was at the Queen's funeral sitting behind 6 former Prime Ministers who were all, even Johnson, looking like they sort of understood the gravity of what's going on.
But I think he's not conscious of what he's doing. I don't think he was... I genuinely think to defend...
Well, let me ask this question.
No, but let me just finish on this because nobody's defended him and I'm going to try to defend him. It's not really defence, but I think he's laughing in some weird way in something that's just crossed his mind and he's completely unaware of his body and his laughter. I don't think he saw anything. I don't think he was laughing at the funeral.
Do you know it's defensible at the Queen's funeral?
The defence is he's a weird guy. I don't think he was laughing at the Queen. I think he had a thought and he started chortling and he does that all the time.
All I'm saying, if that had been Jeremy Corbyn or Diane Abbott, would you say, oh, well, they're a bit weird? No, the papers would try to destroy them for saying they were disrespecting the Queen.
That's basically been the Labour defence of Diane Abbott for about 20 years, hasn't it?
God, let me ask this question. Obviously, this one is totally unrelated to Kwasi Kwarteng's strange behaviour. Sean, should MPs be regularly drug and alcohol tested, as in some other industries?
I don't think he was off his head on drug and alcohol.
I didn't say he was. I said it was a totally unrelated question.
But yes, it would be a good idea. Yeah, be nice to test.
Do you think MPs should be drug tested?
Look, it's easy for me to say that. I don't really.
There is a problem with drugs in Parliament.
Apart from famously smoking opium at a wedding in Iran, I'm not a big drug guy and I don't drink very much. So it's fine for me to line them all up for being tested.
Line them all up? No, I think there's quite a few members of the cabinet who've got experience of that. Prisons. I want to ask you about prisons, right? 2 questions here. Patricia Lewis, more than 70% of young people in custody reoffend within a year, is locking up the wrong response. James Marshall, if you could do something truly radical with prisons, what would it be? So why don't you take those two together?
Okay, so first thing is, she's completely right. I met a guy in Bedford prison who'd been in, when I met him, he'd been in 9 times that year. Every time, basically, he was released, he'd reoffend and go back to prison. And so the answer to that is that one thing that I tried to do with David Gork, and that was quite radical.
Well, when David was at Justice.
When he was at Justice and I was the Prisons Minister, is to abolish short sentences in prisons. So a lot of the problems in prisons and outside prisons are caused by people who are sentenced to prison sentences of less than 2 years, many of them for 6 months. They compose about half the prison population, and there is a shocking problem, which is that you are in fact more likely to reoffend if you're sent to prison on a short sentence than if you're not sent to prison at all. It's completely counterintuitive. The public think that by sending someone to prison, you're making the streets safer, but in fact, giving someone a community sentence, they're less likely to reoffend than if they get a prison sentence. Why? Because the prison sentence tears you out of your home, tears you out of your job, disrupts your life, puts you into this very difficult environment, pops you back out again in a few weeks, because often your Durham prison, I think the average stay was 10 days, just long enough to disrupt your life, definitely not long enough to improve it.
What's the radical plan then?
So the radical plan was to get rid of all sentences under 2 years. And we actually got a white paper written. We got Theresa May signed up to it.
She was signed up to it.
Huge political heat. There were front pages in the Daily Mail about me saying, Rory Stewart, prison minister, gives green light to criminals. Colleagues shouting in the House of Commons.
They backed the criminal as Prime Minister.
I had colleagues shouting, exactly those same people, shouting at me in the House of Commons. And I was trying to explain that actually getting rid of these short sentences would make the streets safer,
well, you
not
were
more
right,
dangerous.
And they were wrong, Rory.
Okay, here's a question for you. Tim Bale. Given all the talk and concern, Tim Bale's distinguished professor, University of London.
Yes, I know who Tim Bale is.
Given all the talk and concern about the influence on the trust government of market fundamentalist think tanks with so-called dark money funding, do you think it'd be a good thing if the UK followed Germany and allowed political parties to set up arm's length, publicly and therefore transparently and well-funded think tanks of their own?
Why do you say well-funded? Are we going to Germany? I'll put that down to jet lag. Well, we could do that now, could we not?
Well, he says these not only play a really important role in political and policy debate in Germany, but by having offices all over the world are also a useful platform for projecting both German and soft power and democracy promotion. So things like the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Yeah, very good.
The Stiftung, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung.
Yeah.
You can't be a good Stiftung. We need Stiftungen.
And it would be called after some famous leader, right?
Yeah, Rory Stewart.
Exactly.
Stiftung.
Rory Stewart Stiftung.
What Tim Bale should understand is that we are the think tank.
Well, you and me.
You and I. Sorry, your grammar is just collapsing all around me here. You wouldn't say you and me are the think tank, would you?
No,
You'd say you and I are the think tank.
I wouldn't say that. No,
so therefore, it wouldn't be
say
you and I.
you and me in the think tank. No.
So no, I think look, this thing about the right wing think tanks, though. I mean, those Institute of Economic Affairs people, the Tufton Street Brigade. Yeah. They still get paraded by the BBC and Sky and ITV as though there's some kind of independent. They are part of a very right-wing political project. We need more of that kind of intellectual heavy lifting going on the left of politics. So I think Tim Bale's absolutely onto something. And Labour should be doing more of that stuff.
Yeah. And here we are, back from the break.
Our final question is directed directly at you from Dr. Wendy Smith. And you may not be aware of this story, but if you aren't, I'll fill you in on it. Rory, did you ever spend thousands of pounds on haircuts and beauty treatments while at DFID? And could you please explain the approval procedure for expenses? Do you know what this is about?
I guess one of my colleagues has presumably been spending a lot of money on haircuts and makeup.
And do you know who it might be?
Could it be Kwasi Kwarteng?
No. Think even more senior within the government.
Liz Truss.
That's the one. Emily Thornberry has got hold of all these spending from Liz Truss's foreign secretaryship, including £1,800 to Norwich City Football Club, which apparently Liz Truss supports.
And how much was she spending on haircuts and stuff?
A lot, thousands.
That's pretty weird.
Whether it's her or it's the department, I don't know. But the point is, they won't answer questions about it.
That is pretty weird. I think that's pretty weird.
What was the worst? What was the most?
So I wasn't allowed. So Liz Truss, when she was the Secretary of State Deferent and I was the flooding minister, and I was very keen to try to learn about the American experience from Hurricane Katrina. You remember, being a disaster. So I said I want to fly to the US and talk to the Americans about what they learned, because I'm the flooding minister. I want to learn the lessons from them. And I was told that I could not get a £400 economy class flight to the United States. as the flooding minister in charge of a £2.4 billion budget to have a meeting with the United States.
Who told you that? Liz Truss?
The permanent secretary, and apparently on instructions from Liz Truss that there was going to be no travel paid for. So I paid for myself to go to talk to the head of the Federal Environmental Management Agency.
So why is she allowing spending on haircuts and beauty treatments and tickets at Norwich City Football Club? I don't get it.
Is it possible they were taking some great foreign dignitary to watch Norwich City?
Well, I'm a very good friend of Delia Smith, who's the big cheese, and I can assure you that Delia Smith would not charge some big foreign dignitary. She'd welcome him and feed him and give him or her a very nice time. So something very weird is going on.
Is Norwich City not near Liz Truss's constituency?
Apparently she supports Norwich City, which is not a crime. Ed Ball supports Norwich City. Charles Clarke supports Norwich City.
That's a bit odd.
The whole thing's odd. Rory, I know you've been very busy, but Google Emily Thornberry on Liz Truss expenses and see the list. It is weird. And back to double standards, there's next to no coverage of it in the right-wing media.
And there's also been a series of requests on the meetings done in the Foreign Office by Chris Bryant. You've been following this, I'm sure.
I have, yes.
Yeah. So Chris Bryant, ex-clergyman, isn't he? Mm. Labour MP.
He actually appears in episode 3 of Make Me Prime Minister in 2 weeks' time.
My goodness.
Alongside Johnny Mercer.
Wait, is this the show that you did with Baroness Saeed Awasi?
That one. Which I plugged almost as much as you plugged your not very interesting, your excellent radio documentary series about
I'm sure you haven't listened to that, and I'm going to be watching your thing so loyally.
Are you?
I've been really offended by
9:15 Tuesdays.
Yeah, brilliant. 9:15 Tuesdays. Yes, anyway, so finally, Chris Bryant's been trying to push questions on meetings in the Foreign Office, and he's noticed a very odd thing, which is that you're supposed to record all your meetings with other people, and it appears, from what he put out on Twitter, that in November and December, Liz Truss had recorded only 2 meetings in the Foreign Office. And actually, I think people accuse her of many things, but she's not idle. She's a very busy, active person. So the question is, who were the other meetings with, and could we please know?
Well, she doesn't strike me as being terribly keen on the old transparency thing now that she's got the top job. But Rory, this is all coming back to a central point. The rules of the institutions that are meant to hold government to account are collapsing, and people are not angry enough. And we've been talking about Iran, where people are taken to the streets. We've been talking about Brazil. In fact, let's close with this question from Christina Malaise. If the RSPB are calling for mobilisation, how long before we see mass civil unrest? I actually don't think we might be not that far away.
So let's just finish on that. Because
I'm not suggesting that's what we want, but I'm suggesting people need to be angry about this bloody government.
So one of the reasons why we should be angry with the government is that what is happening is that the last shreds of what used to be the one nation tradition of moderate conservatism is going out the window. First, we've had all the ideas of balancing the budget and fiscal responsibility out of the window. They're borrowing and spending like you can't believe, and cutting taxes at the same time. And now, actually, our stewardship, in inverted commas, that we used to be proud of nature, the countryside, the landscape, 6 years of work of trying to build a sensible environmental policy. One of the few things that actually Johnson government got okay is now seems to be ripped up as well, and I can understand why all these nature organisations are in the street.
We've got massive and growing poverty, and a government that's economic strategy is devoted at the top the people who've already got lots. It's just
it's deeply distressing.
They're dishonest,
deeply distressing,
and I think we've got to be a lot angrier than we are.
So I know we're meant to be finishing us, but where is the apathy coming from?
I think a lot of it is the way our media covers politics. But I think a lot of people are just turning away from it and thinking they can't do anything about it.
So I saw this in the lead up to the Italian election, and there was some fantastic Al Jazeera reporting. I want to put a little probe for Al Jazeera, in which every Italian they were interviewing was just like, they're all the same. All these politicians the same. I'm not going to go and vote. And at the bottom of it is this massive economic crisis hitting Italy with energy prices. An even more extreme version of what's hitting us now.
Right, so it's people thinking they can't make a difference and the politicians can't make a difference. So then we get the bad politicians who do make a difference, but it's for the worse.
Right, and then we get the Berlusconi Boris and everything that follows on from that.
Yeah. And I do think
so.
that
Economic decline, apathy, cynicism,
media,
and it creates this horrible, vicious environment, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's got to change, Rory.
And on that note, we bring this to a close.
Thank you, Rory.